What if the most dangerous thing humans ever learned to control wasn't a weapon or an enemy or an empire? What if it was something that could level an entire forest in a single night? Fire. Here's the strange part. Long before humans could control their own anger, long before they could control jealousy or fear or the urge to strike first and think later, they figured out how to control something that can destroy a landscape in hours. We tamed fire hundreds of thousands of years before we made any real progress taming ourselves. Why does that gap exist? And why, all these thousands of years later, does it still exist? Go back far enough and there's no light switch, no stove, no street lamp. When the sun disappeared, so did your ability to see a predator coming. Cold wasn't a mild discomfort. It was a slow, patient killer that thinned out the weak and the unlucky. Every single night was a gamble you had no choice but to take. Meat was raw, tough to chew, full of parasites your body had to fight off just to survive the meal. Your gut had to work overtime, burning huge amounts of energy just to pull a little nutrition out of food that fought back the whole way down. And the brain running that whole operation was small, smaller than it needed to be to build anything resembling a civilization. Somewhere in that darkness, something changed. It probably didn't start with invention. It likely started with opportunity. A lightning strike, a smoldering branch left behind after a wildfire moved through. Early humans didn't discover fire the way we like to imagine it in some triumphant flash of genius. They scavenged it. They found it already burning and made a decision that would end up rewriting the species. They decided to keep it. That decision mattered more than people realize. A fire that goes out is a fire you have to wait for lightning to hand you again, and lightning doesn't take requests. So keeping a flame alive for a day, then a week, then passing it down through generations who'd never seen it start was arguably the first real act of control humans ever exercised over the natural world. Not hunting, not tool-making. Keeping something wild, alive, and manageable on purpose for the first time in the history of life on Earth. And once fire could be kept instead of just found, everything downstream of it started to shift. Cooked food breaks down easier than raw food. That means less energy spent on digestion and more energy left over for everything else the body wants to do. Some researchers argue this single shift is directly tied to why human brains grew larger while human guts grew smaller over time. Cooking didn't just make food taste better, it may have quite literally funded the growth of human intelligence one meal at a time over hundreds of thousands of years. But that's still not the strangest part of this story. Fire didn't just change bodies, it changed behavior, and behavior is where things get interesting. Think about what a fire actually does once the sun goes down. It pulls people into a circle around it, whether they plan to gather or not. It lights up faces well enough to read expressions, something daylight hunting and gathering never really allowed for. It creates a stretch of hours after dark where there's nothing left to hunt, nothing left to gather, and nowhere else worth being. For the first time in human history, people had free time, together, in the dark, with nothing to do but talk. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer groups have noticed something remarkable about this. Daytime conversation tends to be dominated by practical talk, complaints about the hunt, logistics, minor disputes over who did what and who owes who. But nighttime, fireside conversation shifts almost entirely towards something else: stories, myths, gossip. Shared history passed from the old to the young, night after night until it hardened into tradition. The campfire might be the very first stage humans ever built, the first place where status was performed in front of an audience, where reputations were made or destroyed with nothing but a well-told story, where an entire tribe's shared beliefs got passed down without a single word ever being written, because writing wouldn't exist for another 100,000 years. Fire didn't just cook dinner. It may have quietly created culture itself. So here's the paradox, laid out in full. A species that couldn't yet control its own violent impulses, that still solved most conflicts through raw force, somehow found a way to domesticate a force capable of wiping out everything around it. We built controlled burns before we built controlled tempers. We learned to keep flames from spreading before we ever learned to keep our own emotions from spreading out of control. And somehow, that imbalance never fully corrected itself. Fast forward past agriculture, past the first empires, past centuries of kings who could raise armies with a single order but couldn't manage a single insult without declaring war over it. Fast forward past the Industrial Revolution all the way to right now. Humans have gone on to master forces almost unthinkably more dangerous than a campfire. We split the atom. We harnessed electricity well enough to light entire cities at once, at the flip of a switch. We built machines capable of ending civilization with the push of a single button. And most days, we don't push it. But put that same species behind the wheel of a car in heavy traffic and watch how fast that mastery disappears. Ranger cuts us off, and for a few seconds, the same brain that helped design a nuclear reactor is fully prepared to ram another vehicle over nothing more than wounded pride. Put that same species in a group chat or a comments section and watch a stranger's opinion online produce more visible rage than an actual physical threat ever would. We are, technologically, something close to gods. Internally, we're still figuring out how not to snap at a stranger over a parking spot. It raises an uncomfortable question. If it took hundreds of thousands of years to go from a stolen ember to a fire that stays lit on command, how long does it actually take to domesticate a temper, a craving, an impulse that fires off before the rational brain even gets a vote in the matter? Maybe the honest answer is that we're still somewhere in the middle of that process. Maybe self-control was never something humans arrived with, fully formed and ready to use. Maybe it's a technology the exact same way fire was, something discovered mostly by accident, kept alive only through deliberate, repeated effort, passed down the same way stories were passed down around that very first flame, generation after generation, imperfectly, slowly, but passed down all the same. Every culture that ever built a philosophy around restraint, around patience, around not reacting the moment anger shows up, was essentially trying to do to the mind what our ancestors once did to fire: contain it, direct it, make it useful instead of destructive. Most of them are still working on it. If our ancestors could take something as wild and indifferent as fire and eventually bend it into something that cooks dinner and lights a room on command, the real question isn't whether humans can eventually master themselves too. It's what it will actually take to finally light that fire.